Welcome back, dear listeners of Sci-Fi Stories. Unfortunately, our channel has been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our hardworking team can sustain their livelihoods and continue bringing these sci-fi universes to you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link in the video description or pinned comment. Now, let us dive into the void. High above the galactic plane, suspended in the silent cold of deep space, stood the Apex. It was not merely a space station. It was a monument to absolute, unyielding dominance, crafted from harvested stardust and trapped light. Its colossal spires pierced the very fabric of reality. Time itself seemed to slow around its golden arches and sweeping crystalline bridges. Here, 1 trillion lives across 1,000 galaxies were managed like lines of simple code, and entire civilizations were snuffed out with the casual flick of a glowing appendage. Today, the collective gaze of the universe's most powerful beings turned toward a tiny, unremarkable blue sphere. The grand rotunda of the apex hummed with the resonance of a multitude of alien dialects, all translating seamlessly through the psychic ether of the chamber. The Galactic Council had convened in their floating, obsidian thrones to vote on a project of monumental scale. They were preparing to initiate the harvest of a primitive world called Earth by fully integrating it into the Loom. The Loom was the Council's dark masterpiece, a multi-dimensional parasitic web woven through the dark matter of the universe. Its sole purpose was to siphon the raw creative energy, the driving passions, and the desperate willpower of lesser worlds. This stolen vitality was the invisible engine that maintained the opulent immortality of the Council, feeding on the vibrant dreams of the weak, so the strong could bask in eternal, unchallenged prosperity. Representative Xylar of the Lumina Ascendancy sneered, his translucent skin shimmering with quantum arrogance. He projected images of human cities into the center of the rotunda, highlighting their crude asphalt roads and primitive satellite networks. To the highborn species of the Council, Earth was nothing more than a cosmic joke. Humans still relied on combustion engines, rudimentary physical metals, and fragile biological bodies. They had not even brushed the threshold of spiritual quantum energy. They were little more than apes playing with fire, entirely ignorant of the grand symphony of the cosmos. Integrating them into the Loom would provide a raw, albeit unrefined, surge of survival instinct to power the pleasure grids of the inner worlds for at least 10,000 orbital cycles. Suddenly, the ambient temperature in the massive rotunda plummeted violently. The quantum shielding, designed to effortlessly withstand the fury of a dying star, did not so much as flicker, yet the atmosphere froze solid. Frost crystallized instantly on the floating data streams and the golden banisters. Out of the absolute nothingness, at the very center of the chamber, a silhouette coalesced. It was the Keeper, an ancient, nameless entity from an epoch before the stars had even formed. It made absolutely no sound as it fully materialized, appearing as a terrifying void wrapped in robes of woven shadows. The telepathic murmurs and boastful chatter of the ambassadors died instantly, replaced by a suffocating dread. The Keeper did not speak with a physical mouth. Instead, a voice of crushing weight and infinite age echoed directly into the minds of every single being present, vibrating painfully against the insides of their skulls. The human mind is a black hole of parallel chaos and logic. Do not connect them to the Loom. Their lack of weapons is not a weakness, but the reason they have forged their will into the sharpest weapon. Silence hung heavy in the freezing air, but it lasted only for a fleeting moment. Greed is a universal constant, and pride is its inseparable twin. Representative Xylar scoffed aloud, projecting his blatant dismissal across the psychic network for all to feel. The Keeper was an outdated relic, a ghost story meant to frighten hatchlings. The Council possessed matrix filters of unimaginable complexity, capable of crushing the psychological resistance of 100 hive minds simultaneously. What could a species of scattered, bickering primates possibly do against the absolute perfection of the loom? The Council firmly believed that humanity's chaotic emotions would be broken down into docile batteries within fractions of a cycle. The Keeper lingered for just a fraction of a second, radiating a profound, icy pity, before dissolving back into the cosmic void, just as silently as it had arrived. As the entity vanished, the ambient heat returned, and with it, the boundless hubris of the Council. The vote was finalized in a roaring chorus of glowing affirmations. The decision was absolute. The harvest of Earth would commence immediately. Orders were swiftly relayed to the lower engineering decks. The Council would not waste time with grand armadas or physical invasions. Instead, they initiated the awakening of the loom by opening a localized, cross-dimensional displacement portal. Their plan was surgically precise: abduct a single, random human from the planet's surface. This isolated individual would serve as the first connection seed, the initial biological spark needed to boot up the Matrix and pry open the floodgates of humanity's collective consciousness. The temporal coordinates were locked. The harvesting portal flared to life, reaching out across the dark expanse toward the blue planet. Deep beneath the glacial ice of Antarctica, where the surface temperature hovered around 60 degrees below zero, sat Outpost Echo. Inside this isolated and heavily fortified server control station, Elmer Buffington was violently hammering away at a mechanical keyboard. Elmer was an eccentric network engineer and brilliant mathematician who vastly preferred the rhythmic hum of cooling fans over any form of human interaction. He was currently 72 hours deep into compiling an incredibly complex piece of chaotic algorithmic code, fueled entirely by stale black coffee and sheer obsessive compulsion. Just as his fingers flew across the keys to execute a highly critical command, the air around him warped violently. The localized cross-dimensional displacement portal struck without a sound, swallowing him whole. When Elmer blinked his bloodshot eyes, the freezing server room was entirely gone. He found himself floating weightless inside a non-physical containment field, a prison constructed from pure, pulsating quantum light, located deep within the bowels of the apex. A normal human mind would have immediately shattered under the sheer existential terror of sudden teleportation and the imposing, impossible geometry of the alien architecture. Elmer, however, merely let out a deeply exasperated sigh. He was thoroughly annoyed that his compilation process had been interrupted right at the climax. He looked down at his right hand. He was still clutching his favorite number 2 wooden pencil, ignoring the vast, terrifying void surrounding him. Elmer squinted at the glowing energy bars of his cage. He held up the pencil, closed one eye, and began to measure the amplitude and frequency of the light fluctuations, calculating the sine waves in his head as if he were trying to solve a mundane high school geometry problem. High above the containment sector, the Council watched this bizarre display through their observation grids. They exchanged telepathic waves of absolute mockery. The supreme beings of the galaxy found it endlessly hilarious that this primitive ape was trying to understand a highly advanced interdimensional prison with a stick of yellow wood and graphite. They scoffed at his profound ignorance, judging him as nothing more than an uncomprehending beast. The overseers gave the order to expedite the harvest. With a mental command, they plunged Elmer's mind directly into the central core of the loom, forcing a full neural synchronization to begin the wide-scale draining of his consciousness. They expected a psychic scream of pure agony. They expected his fragile mind to violently unravel into a storm of delicious, raw terror. But absolutely nothing happened. Elmer's brain did not overload. It did not collapse under the weight of the cosmos. As the vast, parasitic network of the loom flooded his synapses with multidimensional data. Elmer did not perceive it as a cosmic torture device or a mystical force. Through the hyper-focused, painfully pragmatic lens of a senior systems engineer, Elmer merely saw an operating system. And to his immense professional disgust, it was an operating system riddled with catastrophic errors. The loom was a bloated, inefficient mess of tangled protocols, severe memory leaks, and redundant, infinite loops. It was not a godlike entity to be feared. It was just poorly written software that desperately needed aggressive debugging. "Amateurs," Elmer muttered under his breath, his voice completely devoid of fear, floating in the psychic ether. Elmer rolled up his metaphorical sleeves. He ignored the soul-siphoning mechanisms entirely, easily sidestepping them by rerouting his own neural pathways. It took him exactly 3 hours to map the primary architecture of the quantum matrix. In the 4th hour, he found it. There was a glaring, foundational encoding flaw in the Council's quantum handshake protocol. The aliens had designed the system to only receive data from harvested worlds, completely neglecting to build a firewall or a secure encryption key for outbound traffic. They were so blindingly arrogant, they never considered that a harvested battery might actually try to send something back. Elmer exploited the vulnerability immediately. He inverted a fraction of the containment frequency, hijacked a core subroutine, and began compiling a hidden string of binary code using the alien system's own processing power. He then launched this localized packet of ones and zeros straight down the open transmission tether that was still firmly anchored to his physical origin point on Earth. Back on the blue planet, klaxons began to blare in subterranean bunkers and top-secret intelligence agencies across the globe. Supercomputers from the Pentagon to independent defense networks in Europe and Asia caught the massive, sudden spike in anomalous data streaming out of the frozen wasteland of Antarctica. The world's superpowers did not know about the Galactic Council, the Loom, or Elmer Buffington's impromptu debugging session. What their elite analysts saw was a terrifying, unprecedented planetary-scale cyber attack originating from an unknown, seemingly impossible source. The sheer complexity and aggressive nature of the encrypted transmission triggered a global automated defense protocol. Assuming humanity was under imminent threat of digital annihilation, international coalitions bypassed all diplomatic red tape within seconds. Within precisely 15 minutes of receiving Elmer's strange signal, Earth unleashed its ultimate countermeasure. The combined military and tech forces released thousands of aggressive, self-learning artificial intelligence programs. These were weaponized, highly adaptive algorithms designed to relentlessly consume and destroy any hostile networks they encountered. This massive, chaotic digital armada locked onto the mysterious transmission line, ignited their virtual engines, and launched a merciless counterattack straight back up into the quantum stars. The counterstrike from Earth slammed into the apex not with the blinding flash of a thermonuclear detonation, but with the silent, suffocating weight of an encroaching plague. The data stream screaming up the quantum tether was a grotesque barrage of weaponized chaos. It was not a conventional energy beam or a plasma barrage. It was billions of gigabytes of raw, unadulterated human noise. It was a torrential rain of polymorphic computer viruses, recursive logic bombs, and the most extreme, contradictory paradoxes ever conceived by the fragmented human psyche. In the digital realm of the quantum matrix, this cyber war manifested as a visceral, bloody battlefield. The self-learning artificial intelligence programs from Earth tore through the ethereal pathways like ravenous wolves let loose in a pristine cathedral. They did not just delete code, they butchered it. They ripped apart the elegant, multidimensional algorithms of the alien network, leaving behind rotting carcasses of corrupted data. The Loom, an ancient and flawless mechanism perfectly engineered to delicately sip the pure, refined ideas of lesser beings, suddenly found a fire hose of raw sewage shoved down its throat. It was instantly poisoned by the sheer density of non-linear human thinking. The parasitic web choked on infinite calculations of irrational numbers, conflicting moral philosophies, and the relentless, deafening static of an entire species that thrived on perpetual information overload. This catastrophic digital infection immediately began to bleed over into the physical reality of the apex. The pristine, indestructible architecture of the galactic station started to violently stutter. Entire wings of the monumental habitat suffered severe rendering errors. Sweeping crystalline bridges flickered and vanished, leaving gaps of empty space. Towering obsidian pillars pixelated into jagged blocks of blinding white light before dissolving entirely. Representative Xylar and the other highborn ambassadors recoiled in sheer terror as their absolute reality warped around them. The flawless energy weapons wielded by the station security forces spontaneously deformed, melting in their hands to become nothing more than harmless. Optical error codes flashing in vibrant magenta and neon green. At the epicenter of this collapsing reality, Elmer Buffington had become a living, breathing Trojan horse. The initial neural synchronization had bridged the gap between his mind and the station. And now, he was the conduit for the apocalypse, inside the very heart of the Matrix. Elmer was completely unbothered by the cosmic storm raging around him. He did not run, and he did not fight. He simply strolled through the collapsing data structures with the casual demeanor of a man inspecting a broken thermostat. Applying his rigid, absolute logic, he began to manually rewrite the source code of his quantum cage. He visualized the mathematical architecture of the glowing bars, found the variable that defined their solidity, and casually changed the value from 1 to 0. The non-physical containment field shattered like fragile glass. Elmer stepped forward, physically crossing the threshold out of the isolation zone and planting his rubber-soled sneakers directly onto the polished floor of the grand conference area. Complete, undiluted panic erupted within the Galactic Council. The supreme beings, whose composure had remained unbroken for thousands of years, shrieked as they realized the primitive ape had breached containment. They immediately abandoned their dignity and screamed for the elite energy sentinels. These were beings of pure, weaponized plasma, the most lethal guard force in the known universe, trained to vaporize rogue planets and silence entire rebellious star systems. A highly coordinated squad of 20 sentinels materialized in the rotunda, their glowing weapons locked onto Elmer. They were given a single, frantic command to annihilate his physical body before the catastrophic infection could spread to the primary life support systems. The sentinels lunged forward, moving at a fraction of the speed of light, their plasma blades raised to cleave the human into atomic dust. "Syntax error," Elmer said dryly, not even bothering to look up from the floor. The deadly guards froze mid-stride, their bodies blurred, snapped violently backward to their starting positions, and lunged forward again, only to snap back once more. They were trapped. In the brief moment it took for the guards to materialize, Elmer had rapidly rerouted the local physics engine of the conference room. By using his own mathematically hardened brain as a temporary network switch, he hijacked the flow of the loom and localized it around the sentinels. He had hastily programmed a localized space-time loop, anchoring it to the gravitational field of the room. The universe's most elite killers were now helplessly caught in a 2-second repeating glitch, endlessly charging forward and resetting like broken video game characters. Elmer walked right past their looping, glowing forms, his eyes already scanning the horizon of the massive chamber for the central terminal. Down on the surface of the blue planet, the brilliant minds analyzing the data stream realized the true, horrifying nature of the invisible tether. The translated fragments of alien code painted a bleak picture. This was not a weapon meant to destroy their infrastructure. It was a parasitic tether designed to latch onto the collective psyche of the human race and drain their life force dry. Standard military doctrine and basic survival instincts dictated a single, immediate response: sever the connection, shut down the grid, and retreat into the dark. Yet, pushed to the absolute brink of extinction, humanity made a collective choice that defied all rational preservation tactics. They chose to step into the fire in an unprecedented act of terrifying, global solidarity. The leaders of Earth commanded their engineers to do the exact opposite of retreating. They ordered the global defense networks to maximize the outward bandwidth to its absolute physical and digital limits. "Open every channel!" the unified command echoed through the subterranean bunkers. "Give them everything we have." Instantly, emergency overrides hijacked every television station, radio frequency, satellite array, and cellular network across all 7 continents. A single, desperate message was broadcasted to every man, woman, and child. They did not need to understand the intricate quantum mechanics of the alien threat. They only needed to understand that a cosmic predator had come to consume their souls. From the densely populated, neon-lit streets of sprawling megacities to the freezing, isolated outposts in the high mountains, over 8 billion individuals were simultaneously linked into the global network. They were told to focus their minds on the broadcast towers, on their screens, on the very air around them, and to fight back with their thoughts. And humanity answered the call. They did not send organized data. They sent their essence. They poured their profound rage, the ancestral trauma of thousands of years of warfare, their blinding terror of the unknown, and, most importantly, their utterly unyielding, desperate hunger to survive into the open quantum channel. The result was an ocean of raw, unfiltered metaphysical energy. It was a chaotic storm of 8 billion souls screaming into the void all at once. This sheer density of human defiance slammed into the delicate, ethereal pathways of the alien network, generating a catastrophic reverse pressure. The loom, an elegant machine designed to gently sip the passive, docile energy of broken worlds, was suddenly force-fed a hurricane of jagged glass and hellfire. In a matter of minutes, Earth ceased to be the helpless, parasitized host. Through the sheer, brute force of collective willpower, the primitive, mud-bound species surged up the multidimensional tether and violently hijacked the central nervous system of the entire galactic network. The cosmic parasite had choked on its intended prey, and the prey was now ripping the parasite apart from the inside. High above in the grand rotunda of the apex, the pristine illusion of absolute control shattered into a million pieces. Representative Xylar and the remaining highborn ambassadors collapsed from their floating obsidian thrones, clutching their heads as the violent psychic shockwave physically struck them. They gasped for air that suddenly felt too heavy to breathe. Through their tear-filled, horrified eyes, they watched the colossal, holographic tactical displays surrounding them flare a blinding, aggressive crimson. The majestic space fleets of the Galactic Council, vast, invincible armadas of dreadnoughts capable of cracking continents in half, suddenly went entirely dark. Their quantum drives shut down simultaneously in the dead of space. Then, with agonizing slowness, the massive floating fortresses began to rotate. The ambassadors shrieked in absolute despair as they witnessed their own warships locking their heavy plasma batteries and planet-killer cannons onto each other. The core command system of their ancient empire was gone. Humanity now held the master keys to the galaxy's largest arsenal. At the far edge of the crumbling, violently shaking conference hall, the ambient temperature plummeted to absolute zero once more. The Keeper materialized from the shadows for the second time today. The ancient, nameless entity stood perfectly motionless, radiating a piercing, cold luminescence that cut easily through the chaotic, flashing red warning lights of the failing space station. It made no move to intervene. It did not speak a single word of mockery. It merely observed, a silent, cosmic chronicler, witnessing the exact, inevitable prophecy it had delivered just hours ago. The highest echelon of the universe was turning to ash, suffocated by the very chaos they had so arrogantly believed they could harness and bottle. However, the unstoppable human wave did not simply stop at the central hub of the apex. The blistering, radioactive surge of Earth's defiance cascaded outward, riding the intricate, glowing threads of the loom across thousands of distant galaxies. This massive network connected to countless slave planets, bleak worlds where the Council had spent millennia chemically and psychically suppressing the local inhabitants into mindless, docile laborers. As the roaring wave of human emotion washed over these shattered worlds, it delivered something the enslaved races had never once experienced in their entire history. It delivered the intoxicating, burning sensation of raw, human free will. The oppressive psychic chains that had bound them for generations snapped in an instant. Across 1,000,000 different landscapes, trillions of subjugated beings dropped their mining lasers and harvesting scythes. They blinked, their eyes clearing from eons of forced mental fog, and looked up at the stars. They felt the distant human rage boiling in their own blood. They felt the desperate, violent need for freedom. In a singular, universe-spanning moment, the silent factories ground to a halt, the endless slave pits went quiet, and a collective, deafening roar of rebellion echoed across the cosmos. The Empire was falling, and Earth had handed the universe the hammer to smash it. The grand rotunda of the apex was no longer a sanctuary of absolute power. It was a tomb of echoing panic, bereft of their quantum network and watching helplessly as their automated military turned against them. The supreme beings faced the agonizing reality of their own vulnerability. The Council, whose entire existence was predicated on total, unquestioned control, were now feral beasts backed into a corner. Representative Xylar, his translucent skin now flashing in sickly, terrified hues, clawed his way up to the master physical override console. If they could not control the digital ether, they would resort to the most archaic and brutal form of physical warfare imaginable. With a voice trembling, not from sorrow, but from a cold, unyielding hatred, Xylar bypassed the locked digital protocols and issued a manual, voice-activated command to the deep core engineering sector. He ordered the immediate initiation of the Omega Knot. The Omega Knot was a relic from a forgotten, blood-soaked age. An ancient superweapon constructed entirely offline and completely isolated from the vulnerable quantum pathways of the loom. It did not rely on code, software, or sentient energy. It relied on brute, catastrophic physics. The weapon was designed to generate a localized, microscopic black hole, a gravitational singularity that would permanently erase an entire solar system from the very fabric of reality. However, the energy required to jumpstart this apocalyptic machine was astronomical. To acquire that power, the Council made a decision of staggering, unfathomable cruelty. They would rather rule over a kingdom of ashes than share the universe with a species that refused to bow. Xylar slammed his fist onto the primary circuit breaker, physically severing the apex from the loom entirely. In an instant, the golden, life-giving tethers that connected the Empire snapped. The Council deliberately cut off their own lifeblood. By severing the connection, they condemned over 50% of the planets within their vast empire to immediate, catastrophic ruin. Trillions of lives were suddenly plunged back into the Dark Ages, their skies going black, their advanced societies crumbling into primitive dust in mere seconds. The Council was willing to burn their own glittering civilization to the ground, sacrificing half of their domains without a single vote or a moment of hesitation, so long as they could ensure the total annihilation of the mud-born apes who had humiliated them. Back at the central terminal, the blinding holographic displays surrounding Elmer Buffington shifted from digital chaos to stark, terrifying physical telemetry. The chaotic rendering errors vanished, replaced by cold, hard data streaming in from the deep core of the station. Elmer pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, his eyes darting across the rapidly spiking barometric and gravitational readings. He traced the architecture of the new threat and felt a rare, cold knot form in his stomach. This was not a software bug. This was not a flawed matrix protocol he could cleverly rewrite. Nor was it a firewall he could bypass with chaotic logic. The Omega Knot was a colossal, analog machine grinding to life. It was heavy metal and raw mass. No amount of brilliant cyber warfare could stop a physical singularity once the firing mechanism had been fully triggered. Far below, across the surface of the blue planet, the triumphant roars of humanity died in their throats. Broad daylight abruptly turned into the pitch black of midnight. A terrifying, unnatural silence fell over the world as the ambient light of the sun was warped and swallowed. Just beyond the orbit of the moon, the invisible fabric of space began to violently tear apart. A point of absolute, crushing darkness expanded, warping the starlight around it into a dizzying halo. The temperature on Earth plummeted by 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. The gravitational pull of the planet immediately went haywire. Oceans surged, pulling tides hundreds of feet into the air. The moon itself began to groan, massive fissures cracking across its pale surface as it was slowly pulled toward the gaping maw of the micro-black hole. The countdown to human extinction was no longer measured in centuries or years. The telemetry scrolling across Elmer's screen indicated that the total consumption of the solar system would occur in exactly 7 minutes and 45 seconds. Chaos raged around the terminal as the physical foundations of the apex groaned under the immense power draw of the superweapon. Sparks rained down from the shattered ceiling, yet staring the absolute end of the world right in the face. Elmer did not panic. He did not run screaming for an escape pod, nor did he waste his final moments fruitlessly smashing the indestructible control panel with his fists. He was a man of logic, and panic was the enemy of logic. Elmer let out a quiet, tired breath and reached deep into the pocket of his heavy, insulated winter coat. He withdrew a rugged, terribly mundane object he had brought with him from the freezing server room in Antarctica, a simple, solid-state portable hard drive. It was scratched, wrapped in a single piece of duct tape, and entirely out of place in a universe of quantum light. Elmer slowly walked around the side of the monolithic terminal. He ignored the screaming alien ambassadors and the blaring sirens warning of imminent doom. He knelt beside a forgotten maintenance access panel, pried it open with his favorite wooden pencil, and found exactly what he was looking for. It was a raw, unfiltered, physical communication port, a legacy hardware connection left over from the station's original construction. With a loud, satisfying click, Elmer pushed the metal connector of his hard drive directly into the heart of the apex. When the apocalyptic countdown reached exactly 5 seconds, the grinding metallic scream of the station abruptly ceased. The localized black hole, hovering menacingly near the moon and preparing to swallow the solar system, halted its catastrophic expansion. It simply hung there, a frozen tear in the fabric of space, caught in a terrifying state of suspension. The absolute, crushing end of the world had been paused. Elmer Buffington calmly pulled his hand away from the terminal. He turned his back on the blaring warning screens and took a slow, deliberate walk into the very center of the Grand Rotunda. Representative Xylar and the remaining highborn elites, realizing the destruction had stopped, attempted to lunge at him. They tried to scream frantic orders to their engineers to manually reignite the superweapon. But to their absolute horror, their biological forms would not obey. Their limbs locked completely in place, their vocal cords paralyzed. The supreme beings of the universe were trapped inside their own bodies, reduced to living statues staring helplessly at a man wearing a heavy winter coat. "You are experiencing a slight latency issue," Elmer said, his voice echoing cleanly through the massive, silent chamber. I suggest you calm down and listen. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his favorite wooden pencil, and used it to point toward the ceiling. During the previous hour, when my planet flooded your quantum network with our noise, my artificial intelligence programs were not just breaking your toys. They were executing a massive, heavily encrypted download protocol. Elmer lowered the pencil and looked directly into Xylar's terrified, frozen eyes. Your network requires a constant synchronization of consciousness to maintain your immortality. We noticed that the minds of the council members, the entire ruling elite of this empire, were permanently tethered to the core mainframe. So, we simply used your open connection to cut and paste. The realization hit the alien ambassadors like a physical blow, though their faces remained frozen. Elmer paced slowly around the paralyzed aliens, his tone entirely devoid of malice, operating only on cold, unyielding logic. Right now, your true consciousness, the actual essence of who you are, is no longer housed in these bodies. It is currently locked inside an isolated, cold storage server buried under 2 miles of glacial ice in Antarctica. The magnificent beings standing before me are nothing more than empty, organic shells being remotely piloted by a secure server on Earth. He stopped pacing and delivered the final, crushing judgment. I read the telemetry. The Omega Knot cannot be turned off. It is a physical chain reaction that has already begun. It can only be redirected. But if Earth is destroyed, the server in Antarctica turns to ash. If that server dies, the consciousness of the entire galactic ruling class will be permanently, irreversibly erased from existence. Checkmate. The supreme beings of the galaxy were completely locked dead by their own ruthless, inescapable logic. They had built an empire on the premise of absolute survival of the fittest, and they had just been entirely outmaneuvered by a species that fundamentally understood survival better than they ever could. If they killed the humans, they killed themselves. Through the remote tether, Elmer granted them just enough motor control to access the central targeting console. Defeated, humiliated, and stripped of their godhood, the council surrendered unconditionally. With trembling, heavy hands, Representative Xylar input the override coordinates. The Omega Knot was violently redirected. The black hole vanished from the Earth's horizon and was fired into a desolate, barren sector of deep space, consuming nothing but empty void. Humanity did not execute the council. They did not need to. They now held the ultimate hostage, fundamentally resetting the fabric of galactic power. As the emergency lights faded back to a calm, steady glow, the Keeper appeared one final time at the edge of the room. The ancient entity looked at Elmer, looked at the paralyzed gods of the old universe, and offered a faint, terrifyingly beautiful smile. Then, it dissolved into the cosmic ether, its purpose entirely fulfilled. A new era had officially begun. An era where a primitive blue planet would govern the cosmic balance not through sterile control, but through beautiful chaos, boundless compassion, and an absolutely indomitable will to survive. Thank you so deeply for listening to our story today. Where in this vast world are you tuning in from? Please let us know in the comments. If you found today's journey captivating, we humbly ask for your support. A contribution of just $1 helps us pay our incredibly hardworking staff, allowing them to feed their families and continue creating these immersive sci-fi universes for you. You can easily support us by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description and pinned comment. Stay safe and keep looking at the stars.